Hello and welcome to another Reaconteur video, and in today's video I will be going over the best enchants in Deepwoken and what they're best used for. I will not be covering armor enchants or weapon enchants that are never worth using, only the ones that are good for what they're good at. Make sure to subscribe since only about 20% of the people watching right now are actually subscribed. And also I'm currently live on Twitch, so come check me out over there. Now let's get into it. First of all, I just want to cover Astral. Astral is the most recent public addition to the game. While it was obtainable through Wishmasters, it was added to the normal game's loot pool for enchants because the Wishmasters don't want to play the game, I guess. Anyway, Astral is straight away the best enchant for any kind of PvE, and all you have to do is look at the first effect that it gives. Because the first effect is a straight 20% damage buff to any non-player enemies. This in itself is already crazy, but also the second effect is that this enchant's damage buff bypasses both the hard and soft damage caps for PvE. Normally your damage multipliers are capped at a certain percentage to stop people from doing too much damage and shredding through enemies. The soft damage cap means that everything past the soft damage cap, which I believe is like 1.75, basically reduces the multiplier from there. And then the hard damage cap is the absolute maximum multiplier that you can have on your damage, which is like 1.95. This additive 20% damage, however, is not affected by that damage cap, the soft or the hard version, making it the absolute best enchant for PvP and making you capable of doing over 200% damage or more per hit if you have the right modifiers. Not only that, but either critting or parrying 3 times in a row will spawn a meteor that does 100 flat damage to all enemies in its radius, which is really good for enemies that you need to parry against a lot, like golems, sharkos, and some others. And when you can get hyper armor with certain crits, you can kind of just spam a ton of enemies with crits to get those meteors down. This enchant is easily the #1 in DPS for PvE farming, making it amazing for the Diluvian mechanism or Hell mode, and it's also fine for bosses because you're doing 20% more damage to the bosses, and then if you parry 3 times or crit 3 times, then you get the meteor down on the boss too. It's absolutely amazing. Next up is Blazing. If this enchant didn't have a unique effect that was kind of fun to use, it wouldn't be on this list. Blazing synergizes with Flame Charm very well to make it decently viable in PvP builds with the paths. With Blazing, it normally just applies burning, which is very underwhelming and not worth using. However, if you have either of the 2 Flame Charm paths, it gets a special effect. With Lava Serpent, it causes flame pillars to erupt on people you hit, which is still mid because Lava Serpent kind of sucks, but if you ever get someone in a corner without enough tempo to vent, you can kind of recreate Corner Ignis from Rogue Lineage if you know what that is. And Twisted Puppets makes it so it spawns a puppet after every hit. Overall, with either of the Flame Charm paths, Blazing is actually really good and a great PvP choice. Without it, it's not worth using, but if you're using Flame Charm in either of its paths, I would definitely recommend going for Blazing over any other enchant pretty much, unless your build is specializing with one enchant for whatever reason. Next is Deferred. This enchant is kind of just free damage. It was terrible for a little while, but then they made Deferred start going through iframes, so it became viable since it's just a damage buff, making it decent for PvP and terrible in PvE. I honestly don't know why I'm mentioning Deferred though, it's still mid even considering the iframe negation. I probably shouldn't have put it in this video titled The Best Enchants in Deepwoken because I would never use it, but there's probably some good decent uses for it, and it's probably just better to have it than not have it because the only way that you're ever going to really lose because of this enchant is if you down someone with the damage over time and then they down you, but then they got knocked first, so I guess they get up first. You know, that doesn't even make sense. It would be the opposite. No, this enchant's just always better to have than not have. It's whatever. Next up is Elastic. This enchant is the best if you like doing combos, since its special effect pulls people into you on hit and proc, so it can actually set up for more combos. This is pretty much the only enchant that benefits a combo playstyle rather than just supplementing with utility or damage, making it quite fun and unique, giving you a new potential playstyle. I personally love Elasticity, and it's one of the more unique enchants in the game, and if you have it, I would definitely recommend keeping it because you could do a lot of cool stuff with it. Next is Chilling, and Chilling has the unique attribute of applying the bottom freeze talent, which freezes people, after hitting your opponent a certain amount of times, depending on what type of weapon you're using. Guns is 5 hits, light is 7 hits, medium is 4, and heavy is 3. For those of you who don't know, every enchant with an on-hit count effect is going to have the same values, so you're going to have to hit people X amount of times depending on your weapon. So guns is always 5, light is always 7, medium 4, and heavy is always 3. Anyway, this this enchant also applies either chilling or crystallization ice crystals on hit if you have crystallization. Overall, chilling is really good for ice builds of any type, and it can be used in PvE since ice talents can sometimes be useful, but I really wouldn't recommend using it for PvE. It, however, does shine in PvP on frost draw builds, where talents or just crystallization can be much more easily procced, as you no longer need to rely on your mantras to make ice paths or put crystals onto people. Chilling is a really good enchant, especially if you don't like the Grand Sudaruska and prefer a different weapon. I love this enchant on any frost draw build. Next is Grim, and this is one of my favorite PvP enchants. On its proc after hitting your opponent enough times, which it's the same interval for all hit amounts as the chilling, so 7 guns, 3 heavy, etc. Anyway, after hitting them enough times, you proc Grim, which causes them to take 20% more damage for the next 6 seconds following. Generally, with 6 seconds of time, 20% of damage can either be very significant or just a slightly higher damage M1 depending on the user. A really good player can land an entire combo in the next 6 seconds, dealing a ton more damage. A mediocre player can probably land a hit or two. It's very user dependent, but it's very good when it works and when in the hands of an actual good player, which is why I personally love this enchant. And next up is Nemesis. Landing a hit will mark your target for 15 seconds. If you crit within this time, it will teleport you to your opponent with a 70 stud range, doing equal damage to the hit you landed initially to mark them, so about an M1 of whatever your weapon is. This enchant is especially interesting because if you mark multiple people then crit, it will teleport to all of them striking them. The one downside of this weapon is that it completely overrides your crit, also making it useless when you don't have someone marked. If nobody is marked, your crit can't hit anyone. Meaning if you're using a weapon with a good crit, this enchant may be a net loss because losing out on a good crit for a teleport that does M1 damage isn't exactly always the best. However, with weapons with bad crits, it can actually benefit quite a lot from this if your weapon has good stats, but you don't like using it because of the crit. You could put Nemesis on it and pretty much just directly upgrade your weapon. Next up is Storm. Storm on proc increases the damage of your hit by 17.5%, while also stunning your opponent more, setting up for potentially more combos on proc. If you also have the Surge path, which you should, I've talked about this in the last video, but Surge is basically a direct upgrade to regular Thundercall. It replaces the extra stun with a Surge stack, which is really good because that's just more damage. This Chilling and Blazing all fall within the category of attunement-specific enchants because they're significantly more beneficial with certain attunements. This enchant is also strange because in the rain it makes it so every M1 does 17.5 damage and the stun or surge effect. However, in the rain it does have a 5-second cooldown to stop you from just having a straight damage up. But realistically, it doesn't matter because against any decent player, you can expect to land M1 every 5 seconds or more. Overall, this enchant is good in the rain and with Thundercall, but it really shines in the rain. So I can't recommend it to be used in Chime of Conflict because it doesn't rain here and you can't use your Rain Spire thing. But if you are carrying Rain Spires around or you're in very rainy areas, very, very good enchant. But next is Stormbreaker, which is a very strange enchant in the fact that it's nearly a direct upgrade to Storm when you look at just its benefits. It basically has all the effects Storm has in the rain, but at all times, and that's the first effect. The only reason I bother bringing up both instead of just one is because it's not as direct of an upgrade as it seems. While initially it seems better, it overrides your crit similarly to Nemesis enchant, where on use of your crit, it throws the weapon and pulls it back kind of like Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, and it deals the equivalent of one M1's worth of damage. In weapons with useless crits, this is basically a direct upgrade because you're doing like 20% more damage, but if your weapon has a good crit that you just overwrote with this enchant, it can be a downgrade, making it very weapon dependent. It is usually pretty good though regardless. And next up is Tears of Edenkite, which makes it so on critical or flourish, bubbles spawn which home in on enemies and explode. There's no way this isn't a Killer Queen reference, it just has to be, alright? This is a JoJo reference. I know, crazy, right? Regardless, it is really good as both a defensive and offensive pressure tool in PvP. If you can't follow up after a crit or flourish, the bubbles pressure your opponent, giving you time to do something. If your bubbles are up, they also stop people from approaching you too aggressively with the potential of being hit by the explosive bubbles. Next is Vampirism, and this enchant's a little bit strange. It makes it so on hit you steal health from both enemies in PvP and PvE. However, against bosses its scaling is lower and it's not affected by the PvE level scaling, so it does pretty much the same lifesteal against players as it does to enemies. This enchant isn't very good in PvP or boss-based PvE. However, in big monster spawn waves like Diluvian Mechanism or Hell Mode, you can actually get a lot of added sustainability and healing from this enchant, which makes it pretty good. The only downside is that it may be outclassed by other PvP enchants, which, I mean, of course it would be. All it really does is steal a little bit of health from your opponent, and it's also outclassed by a lot of PvE enchants, which provide enough damage to make up for the loss of sustainability in comparison. Exhibit A being Astral, which is super strong in PvE. And next is Wild, which has a few strange attributes. On proc, it makes an AoE that does 85% of your target's damage to the people surrounding them. It also doesn't hit the target, so it's not going to just do 85% more damage to them. The crazy thing about this is that it's first of all unavoidable, meaning if you hit someone and his allies are around him and it procs, they will get hit. But also the enchant does true damage. So its normal hit value for damage is minus 15% because it does 85%, and then it does that in true damage, which means that depending on the armor sets of the people around you and your target, you could potentially hit people and deal more damage from the AoE than they would from being hit directly by your weapon because they have better armor, and this is true damage, which is actually really insane. This is a crazy enchant for boss raiding and ganking in general, but it's useless in Chime and mostly in PvE, so only use it if you like ganking the overworld. It also can't hit allies, so as long as you're in a clan, you can actually gank regularly with it and just have a big advantage. Wild is pretty good. Next is Curse of the No Life King, which really doesn't belong in this video, but I had to talk about how terrible garbage dog shit it is. It's so useless. The healing's been nerfed to the point where losing the extra life isn't worth it unless you're always in the depths, at which point you need to run a sanity build to not die, at which point you only kill people off of sanity, so you're countered by sanity builds unless you're also running potions. Which, just so terribly annoying. And then it reduces the efficiency of most healing talents, and it's disabled in Chime of Conflict. Can one of the devs step in and rework this thing already? It doesn't even work in Chime, and it's fucking terrible. This enchant sucks, so I just had to put this in here to tell someone to fix it, because it's awful. Anyway, next is Curse of the Unbidden, which is another crit override enchant. On hit, it drains Ether, but your crit is the main focus because it is now replaced with a counter, which on proc grants you hyper armor, iframes, and stuns your opponent, leaving them open for setups. It also restores 30% of your posture bar, and its cooldown increases if you miss the counter. It is very buggy in PvE, so I'm not going to talk about it for PvE. It's not even that good for PvE, so it's not worth using, but it's decent in PvP, and if your weapon has a bad crit, you can override it with a counter, and it's basically a direct upgrade. And finally, there is Heroism, which technically rewards better players for providing you with more damage the more health you have as a percent, with plus 20% damage at full health, meaning you could stack this with Overflowing Dam or whatever the health talent is that makes you do more damage at full health, but I personally don't like this enchant. It is good in the right hands, but normally it's just not that useful, and halfway through a fight it's just gone. So you just don't have an enchant. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you think I missed a good enchant, Curse of Yun Shul, I know someone's going to mention that, but I didn't want to talk about it. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Shout out to Cyberboy21, Goobka, and Drizzy Drake fan. I love you all. Have an amazing day, and goodbye.